guys, so we're here with Kim and Isaac. I'll be introducing them. Kim Hale is a medical device and life science professional with extensive experience in customer satisfaction, strategic planning, and business consultation. He has 29 years of experience helping life science companies recognize and implement technology strategies that make a meaningful impact in their business. In his role as VP, team lead for medical device at Within3, Kim helps medical device, pharmaceutical, and biotech companies create better patient outcomes by implementing digital strategies that improve internal and external collaboration. Isaac Gornichec partners with medical, clinical, and commercial teams to enhance their communication with outside stakeholders. His leadership in strategic planning, revenue generation, and business consultation has established a solid and diverse client base for Within3. His experience in working closely with pharmaceutical, biotech, medical device, and agency partners to adopt innovative technologies proves invaluable as they develop new solutions to achieve superior outcomes. So guys, please take it away.
Great, Steve. Thanks for the introduction. We appreciate it. Sam, thanks for having us be a part of this presentation, and we look forward to being able to hopefully pass along some great information to you regarding, the virtual engagement capability and the hybrid engagement capability that people are talking a lot about these days. So let me just jump into this really quick, and I'm assuming everybody can see my slides. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Perfect. What we'd like to talk to you guys today about is something that I want you to kind of picture in your mind. I want you to visualize something here because we're all visual thinkers, right? We all can see things, and if you see something and it's relatable, then it sticks with you for a longer period of time. So I want you to think about the last stool that you saw, stool that you were sitting on, maybe at home or in a restaurant or a club you went to, specifically a three-legged stool, because that's what I want to talk to you about just a second here. That three-legged stool, in order for it to stand, to be stable, it needs all three legs. And prior to 2020, back in 2019, we were all fairly stable with our live one-on-one meetings. You remember those days? You remember being able to come together and have personal interaction and meet people and not bump elbows, but actually shake hands with people, give hugs, things like that. Those were the days, right? Those one-on-one meetings. They were great to have, and they were fun. You got to see a lot of your old associates. You got to spend some time going out to a nice restaurant, and it was very enjoyable. Even the national sales meetings, remember how fun those were from a rep standpoint as well. So the real-time engagement, that's kind of the first leg of the stool that you're visualizing in your mind. That's the first leg. Now, what happened in 2020? Okay, COVID hit. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Lots of Band-Aids were thrown out there. People were using different ways to engage with their KOLs, to engage with their steering committees, both internal and external committees. How do we keep together and how do we continue to talk to each other when everybody was sent home? You're now suddenly going into the office every day was not happening. You're now going from your bedroom to your home office. And how do we make this work? And so, again, what happened is the real-time virtual engagement came about. And we'd all used them in the past, right? We'd all had some Zoom calls, some webinars, things like that. And they were good, but they weren't great. Okay, I remember sitting on a lot of Zoom calls in the beginning where there were maybe 10, 15 people on the call, and 2 or 3 people did the majority of the talking. And that was it. And so did you get a lot of information? Well, you did from a couple of people, but not from everybody that you wanted to hear from. So we all became very good at it, though. Whether it was Teams, Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeeting, whatever it might have been, we became very good at them in 2020. Now, that's the second leg of that stool. The third leg is now the anytime virtual engagement. How can you go and engage with somebody at any given time? Not a specific Zoom call or a specific meeting you have to attend, but that you can log into at any time, that you can be a part of whenever you feel like you've got some time to actually engage. And so that's the anytime side of the virtual engagement stool that I'm talking to you about. Live one-on-one meetings, the real-time virtual engagement, the webinars, the Zoom calls, and now adding that third leg, the anytime engagement. That's what we're looking forward to in the hybrid engagement model. So, Isaac, just really quickly, what is the typical structure of a virtual hybrid session?
Good question. It's interesting because I think folks would probably answer this different ways depending on their background, history of their company, how they've engaged, the experiences that they've had. But what we've seen over really develop probably the past year to year and a half, but really over the past 14 to 15 years that Within3 has been in this business. We've seen virtual hybrid sessions consist of this. Usually it's a kickoff call. It's a webcast of about 45 minutes or so. You really don't want to make it any longer than that. That live webcast will run. You'll have introductions. You'll put faces with names, which is helpful, right? We want to see who we're working with, who we're talking to. That's one of the reasons why we love that face-to-face, in-person meeting as much as we do. We love to go out and hang out afterwards. We love to rub shoulders and so on and so forth. But typically what will happen is during the kickoff call, there will also be a Q&A, insights, and discussions that start. And these are your overtime discussions. These overtime discussions, what's nice is that once the webcast stops and is done with, right, you get maybe 5 or 10 people participating if you're lucky out of 15 to 25 folks that are online. Really the Q&A and insight starts. And that usually lasts for about a week or two. We typically see it last for about 10 days or so. And then on day 10, there's typically another web call. If you want to look at it bookending it, right? We're going to start with one end. We're going to have the async session run. You're going to bookend it at the very end. And then you'll run through kind of final deliverables. You'll run through what's needs to happen, what goals need to be met, and so on, kind of the final marching orders. And then usually the session closes. And then there's typically a results call with Within3. Well, in our case, Within3. But depending on who you are and who you're working with, there's usually a results call. If you're not having a results call to really go over and really talk through what information and data you've gleaned and really truly what the answers are, then I'll tell you this, you're doing it wrong. You definitely got to figure out and find a way to conclude the session and then move on to the next step. So, yeah, so Kim, if you want to move to that next slide there. So let's see. So really, what trends are we seeing, right? When typically some of the device trends that we're seeing is that this move to virtual hybrid focus. That in the past we've seen where folks have either participated, like you said, with that three-legged stool, where typically we've either been in person or again in a hybrid type of a situation, or virtual, or a mixture of both. The pandemic brought a lot of that on, but we were seeing a lot of this, you guys, even prior to the pandemic last year. The company that we work for, Within3, was growing by leaps and bounds in 2019 and 2018. 2020, there just became a greater need, and so obviously that definitely picked up. I think we went from running a few hundred sessions a quarter to running thousands of sessions a quarter with clients. I think it's important, too, to think about what selection and who are you using? What type of engagement platform are you using? Is it built for healthcare companies? Is it built for med tech and so on and so forth? And so you want to definitely don't just use it because it's free. When I talk to clients, it's the question that I ask them, and I ask them, say, hey, why are you using the technology that you currently use? Well, it was just given to me, or it's what we have access to. It's on my laptop. It's what I was told to use. Really, and then moving to that next bullet point, I think real-time introductions. I think like what we're doing today, where Kim and I are talking to you, and other folks have so far prior to us have communicated back and forth. It's nice to meet one another face-to-face. I think it's important, again, to put the faces with the names. And then really, are we deep diving through these overtime sessions? These overtime sessions, which we was highlighted on the prior slide, this is where you really get your data from. This is really the information where the rubber starts to hit the road, where people are able to share their insights back and forth. Because I'll admit, if I stopped right now and asked everybody to answer this question seriously, is how much multitasking are you doing right now during this webinar, this web conference? And I bet you everybody would probably raise their hand and go, you know what? I've sent some text messages. I've checked some emails. I've looked into the bios. Maybe I've gone into the booths and the different lounges. I've communicated. Maybe I even jumped off this web call and I started talking to somebody else about some things. And so I think this is where those overtime sessions really come into play, because guess what? You can access overtime sessions when it's important to you, when it's convenient to you, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing that's really great about being able to access virtual hybrid engagement. Now, the real-time connection, right, versus the consensus. I think what's important is that it is nice to be able to close the session using a webcast, which again we highlighted on the prior slide. There has to be some close to the session, to the project that you're working on, and then next steps agreed upon, and then of course moving forward. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that last bullet point's important. What are the new ways of thinking? I think the trends that we've seen is that there really has to be a way for us to identify what the most important points of the project are and what to focus on. I think it's key that we engage folks during these conference calls, these asynchronous engagements. And then ultimately, this is another thing from face-to-face is how do we apply those learnings? What do we do with the data? Typically we're used to sitting down around a table or getting on or for 15 minutes meeting and going, hey, what are our next steps? Let's make sense of this data and let's move on. And so what's great is that we can take everything that we learn from face-to-face and we can apply it to hybrid technology as well. So Kim, let's see, what do these trends really mean for your day-to-day?
It's interesting because as we were talking about this, as I first came to work for Within3, the pandemic was kind of in full swing. But what the hybrid engagement model or the overtime discussion capability, it made sense to me prior to the pandemic. Being able to measure ROI. There's a new catchphrase that's now out there called an insights gap. And that insights gap is very interesting because what you're looking at is how do you measure your return on investment from a live meeting? Or how do you measure your return on investment from a virtual engagement or a Zoom call? And I use Zoom synonymous, like Kleenex, okay? Everybody, when you say Kleenex, everybody knows what you're talking about. So when you have a Zoom call, how do you measure that return on investment? What are the measurables that you're getting and walking away with from these meetings? And, with an overtime discussion, you have the capability of actually measuring your ROI. So what we have now is, like I said earlier, in 2020, it became a lot of Band-Aids, a lot of third-party apps. Teams happen to be included in Microsoft, Office 360. So we're just going to jump on and use that, or we're going to use GoToMeeting or WebEx or whatever it might be. Or we're going to invite one doctor in at a time for the cadaver lab. And so what happens is we were very reactive to what was taking place. But now we have the ability, and no pun intended here, my dad used to always say the hindsight's 2020. Now we can look back at the year 2020 and we can actually see what worked and what didn't work. We can now be proactive moving forward. So in the remainder of 2021 and on into 2022, unless somebody has a crystal ball that I'm unaware of, we have no idea what's going to be happening. We don't know if we're going to go back into some sort of lockdown, if there's going to be more of a gray area with that, or if everything's going to completely open up and nobody has to wear masks anymore or any of that. But we have the ability now to take what we've learned in the previous year and use it to the best of our ability. And that's the great thing about this is we've all become very good at virtual engagements. So why not continue to use it? It's a whole lot cheaper than live one-on-one meetings. In fact, Isaac, one of the last, physician advisory boards I attended that was live was back in 2019, and it cost them nearly $200,000 in order to bring physicians in to have a 3-day meeting. So we've all gotten much better, and it's much more cost-effective to be able to do these things in a virtual standpoint. We have the ability now by using virtual to expand our groups, to be able to go out. Since a lot of us work on a global level, we talk to people that are in Japan or the APAC region or Latin America or wherever it might be. We can expand our reach because of the virtual engagement capabilities. And so we can have more people. Instead of just the 5 or 6 or 10 people you always talk with, now you have the ability to talk with literally hundreds of people around the globe. And you want to make sure, too, that everything is updated as far as security and compliance goes. You want to make sure you're using a platform that is built for the healthcare industry, that has, regulatory and compliance features built into the platform. So, again, we have the ability to actually plan now for the future, no longer reacting, but being proactive in planning for what we're going to be doing for the future. So, Isaac, one quick question for you. what were some of the challenges that the medical device industry actually felt, had this past year? And what did they do in order to help kind of solve some of those challenges?
It's like, where do we begin, right? I mean, I could probably ask everybody that's online right now in the Q&A to say, hey, look, put up your challenges and let's just address those. And then we could spend the rest of the day just trying to figure out what the heck happened last year. Where did we have to start again, reset, all of that? But typically the challenges, Kim, that I know that you and myself and other members of our med device and pharma teams over at Within3, as we talk to our clients, really what they dealt with was just how in the heck do we get to our KOLs now? No longer can we. At the time, I was working right in the surgical suites, and I worked hand in hand with the cardiothoracic surgeons, rolling up my sleeves, talking with their anesthesiologists as well. And all of a sudden, we went from this interaction, rolling up our sleeves, face-to-face communication, to all of a sudden, hey, guess what? We're done. We're not doing surgeries right now unless they're absolutely necessary. So how do we meet? How do we discuss? How do we talk? Well, typically in the past, we would text one another, and then we would meet up. Well, guess what? Now there's less and less of that that's going on. And so some companies did this a lot better last year than others, where they figured out ways to communicate and work with their current customers, because their current customers still needed to be educated. They still needed to be made aware of what was going on. They continued to, for instance, working with hospitals and meeting with supply chain and procurement and talking to the C-suite and making sure that budgets were in order and that orders were still taking place. And so they needed some kind of a way to meet, in essence, virtually. And again, some people did a great job of it, others didn't. I think following up with folks was another area that was a real challenge for folks. People would have interest in a device, would have interest in a technology, but then how did they work with them? Well, email is pretty antiquated. It's old. It's not a great way to keep. You have to go back through and take a look at all of the replies and people coming in and out. Same thing with some of the messaging apps that are out there. Messaging apps are great, I think, internally, but when you bring in external clients and so on, it's difficult to, again, just encapsulate everything in all of the conversations that are going on. So I know that, Kim, I talked to a lot of folks that were frustrated last year. Some people threw their hands up. Others said, you know what, we're going to go with what we got. We can't do in person, so let's try to do these web calls. Hopefully we can get feedback and real honest feedback. But what we saw was that they felt like they didn't necessarily get what they wanted to. We did see some companies do really well. I don't know if that always says that the numbers at the end of the day, the bottom line, mean that their sales force and their education and all of that are really interacting in a way that's conducive to a great working environment. So I know that people were frustrated by it. And so hopefully, Kim, moving forward, that we'll see a lot more opportunity, because we know that they're out there than challenges. And so really, what are those opportunities that you see clients reference when they're assessing their virtual engagement strategy?
There's a lot of new opportunities that have been, that have come to light, in this past year and a half. But you remember the old adage, the KISS, keep it simple.
Keep it simple, man. Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, because what we want to do is we want to keep this simple, but we want it to be effective. We want it to be extremely effective. In-person meetings, they were good. Webinars, great if you're looking for 50% participation. But being able to take the in-person, combine the webinar, and combine an overtime capability and overtime discussion gives you the information you're looking for. The information to be able to change strategies, the information to be able to change, a specific look of a product or something like that. You're gaining more information. So a lot of the opportunities that we really learned was number one, we could diversify our group of influencers. When you think about that for just a second, it gives you the capability of just always, instead of going to the same 5 or 10 people you've already gone to in the years past, we can now diversify our groups, because now we can talk to people globally. And again, not just on a web call or not just an in-person meeting, but continue the conversation in an overtime type of discussion. And it allows you to include more people. Again, I come back to the global perspective. You can now branch out and expand your sphere of influence to groups that you've never been able to reach out and touch before. It allows physicians and other people you're talking with, be it internal or external people, to have a better work-life balance as well. One of the things that physicians don't want to do is to take time out of their practice or time away from the hospital and run to a meeting. They're busy enough as it is right now. The things slowed down for about a week, and now they're picking back up again. They're setting up tents again here in Utah for people to come through because they don't have room in the ICUs. And so physicians are busy. And we want to be able to get them and still get their input, but be able to do it in such a way that they can come in when they would like to come in, not when they have to be on a specific call or have to be in a specific location. And if we can do all this really well, do you know what we have at the end? We have happier patients, okay? The goal for all of this is to make sure that the patient, that the end user is the one that's feeling better, getting better advice, having instruments that are used on them that are much more sophisticated. So the end goal is if all of this works the way it should work, then we should have happier patients as well. So, Isaac, one question I wanted to ask you too, because I talked about it just briefly a little bit ago, was about the security and compliance side. I know that's been an issue, over the last little while, is do some of the platforms give good security and compliance technology? So what are some of the things that you're learning about that?
It's interesting. I mean, one of the big learnings that I've had over the past probably 18 to 20 months is, besides finding a platform that works, really well for your business, it's important to find a platform that is safe and secure, to do some homework and research on whether or not, especially when it comes to healthcare, right? The healthcare world is very different. We're very highly regulated, as we all know that are on this call. We work in it every day. We've dealt with it for years and years and years. It's different than selling, let's say, cars. Right. And patient privacy is very important, as well as the privacy of companies that have technology and so on. And I think that you need to make sure that you've done your homework. It's important to have, I think, a human element to it as well, that no matter how great computers are and artificial intelligence and as much data crunching and numbers and AI and all of that, that there still needs to be that human element at the end of the day to make some sense of it all, of exactly what the best next steps are. And so I think in order to be ultimately compliant, right, and not just secure, you have to have that human interaction. And I think also the final point is to think about your audience too, of who you're working with and who you're going to involve in these engagements and in these interactions, and how important it is that exactly if you're asking for feedback, how are they giving that feedback? Are they giving that feedback on a web call? Is that important for everybody to hear? Or would you rather have that feedback private, more specific, between perhaps a moderator and one individual, maybe a hallway discussion versus a water cooler discussion, where everybody's sitting around the water cooler in a break room? Nothing like secrets that happen that are shared in the break room, right? Something that we probably don't experience as much anymore, but I have seen secrets and things come up during web calls where I know that the moderators are like, oh no, hold on a second, please don't go there, right? And it's harder to regulate that. There's a reason why in the television business, which Kim, you know this better than anybody, that there's always that 3 to 5 second delay, right? In case something is said or something happens to where they can say, oh, cut, let's not show that. Well, it's typically hard to do during a web call and so on. So those are some of the secure and compliance issues that I think I've seen. The advice, again, to give folks is, again, just do your homework. Make sure that it's something that's right for you and your company. And so, Kim, finally, I wanted to ask you this. What are your thoughts about the future of engagement with medical customers? I mean, this is what we all want to hear, right? What is the future? If you had a crystal ball, tell us a little bit about it, and what are the contingency plans that you're seeing are being put in place?
I think if the pandemic went away today and it was over with, we could all go out, we can do exactly what we were doing, back in 2019, then there still needs to be a plan in place. Okay, there's still a better way of doing something. Okay, for instance, let me give you just a quick for instance. Virtual doctor visits. Being able to sit down with your doctor on a virtual level and have the same type of discussion with them because you went and got your labs drawn and they already have those sitting in front of them. And so now you can just talk to them. My doctor happens to live about 45 miles away from me. And so for me to be able to actually sit down and talk with him in, my own home, and him looking at the same numbers and the same things that he was looking at as if I was sitting right there in the office, man, it's a whole lot more convenient for me. And we just heard earlier today on one of the presentations that were given is the fact that virtual doctor visits are not going away. They're going to become more and more as we see, as we continue to move forward. So why can't we do the same thing as we're engaging both our internal stakeholders, external customers, KOLs, whoever it might, our reps in the field? Why can't we continue to move forward with the engagement on a virtual level? But not just, again, those Zoom calls or their live meetings, but again, those overtime discussions where you usually get more information. I have a client who told me that they got 85% more information from an overtime discussion than they had ever received in a virtual call. So I hope that all of you that are out there, we've helped you kind of realize what are some of the issues we ran into, what are some of the opportunities we see, and what is our plan going to be? If Isaac and I can leave you guys with anything, is think about what your plan's going to be. If the pandemic goes away tomorrow, or if it doesn't, you still need to have that plan in place. Like I said earlier, keep it simple. Look at that three-legged stool. Use those one-on-one meetings, use those virtual engagement capabilities, and use the overtime capability to be able to truly engage and then measure your return on investment with that engagement. So, Isaac, I think that's the biggest thing we can leave people with is make a plan and then work that plan, So anything else from you, Isaac?
You know what? I'd agree. I think it's important to develop the plan, but ultimately work it. Get to work, have the courage to put it in place, to work with others, to cross teams, cross-functionally, and put something in place where you're able to work with one another. There's no reason, because you can't be face-to-face, that you still can't do what you did 2 years ago or even more. I think this actually is pushing us and springboarding us into an area now where we're going to be able to work more effectively together. That's one of the opportunities and really one of the positive things that are coming out of this pandemic on the other side is that we're doing things differently and a lot more effectively.
Great. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to us today. I'm going to go ahead and shrink my screen down. I know we've got about 4 minutes left here. Just if anybody has any specific questions they would like to ask. If not, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you again, Isaac and Kim, for your insightful presentation. And I do want to remind everyone you can book a meeting with either Kim and Isaac via our meeting scheduler. I know some of you have had the opportunity to log in to send some requests over. So once again, we can always reshare your credentials to book a small demonstration and overview of their great platform. So yeah, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time.
Great. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, you're welcome, Sam.